Batman has been and will remain to be one of the greatest and influential superheroes of all time. He and Superman are the foundation for what we know DC Comics as today and helped spearhead the superhero comic book genre. Batman became the second superhero ever to have his own publication, with Batman #1 released in 1940, not too long after Superman received his own publication. For the longest time, Superman was DC's flagship character, the most popular and iconic of the company, with Batman being the close second. However, in the past few decades, Batman has essentially become the cash cow for DC and Warner Brothers. The amount of adaptations surrounding the character have far outweighed that of Superman, with there being a sizable gap in projects given to Batman when compared to the rest of DC's catalog. Batman has appeared in more movies than any other superhero from DC or Marvel, including both live action and animated movies. The amount of Batman iterations we've gotten on the big screen is insane. But why is that the case? When did it come to a point where Batman became DC's most popular and profitable character, surpassing Superman in terms of marketability and popularity? It's gotten to the point where Batman became the first ever superhero to be given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Superman had a pretty significant television and radio presence, starting in the 1940s with the Adventures of Superman radio show. Around 20 million listeners were tuning in to the Adventures of Superman within a year's time. The writers added elements that would become staples of the Superman mythos, such as Superman's ability to fly, his weakness to kryptonite, the Daily Planet and Perry White, Jimmy Olsen becoming more prominent, and so on. The brand recognition of Superman would only increase over the years with the emergence of future television series and the surge in merchandise from toys to apparel. Fleischer Studios would go on to create the first ever superhero cartoon, which debuted in 1941 and was centered on Superman. The Adventures of Superman series starring George Reeves was the first ever live action series to center on a comic book superhero. Batman would have a couple of dedicated serials in the 1940s, but they didn't have nearly the same cultural impact as the George Reeves Superman show. There really was no other superhero that could compete with Superman in the television space while the Adventures of Superman was airing in the 50s. It wasn't until years after the end of the George Reeves series where Batman had a boom in popularity thanks to the 1966 Adam West series. The success of Batman 66 helped increase circulation of Batman comic books, creating a lasting effect that moved millions of dollars of Batman merchandise. It held the record for most number of episodes for a live-action superhero series until Smallville came around. Despite its initial successes, the series created a stigma of Batman being a very campy character. Ratings dropped at an alarming rate by its third season, and ABC canceled the series by 1968. All of the attention would be placed on Superman again after the release of the Richard Donner Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve. This remains as the quintessential Superman adaptation in live action for a lot of people. Its box office results made it one of the most profitable and popular movies of the 1970s, becoming the second highest grossing movie of 1978 in North America. Superman merchandise was through the roof thanks to the movie being Warner Brothers' biggest success at the time. The sequel received similar amounts of success from a financial and critical standpoint, making around the same as the first in its lifetime box office gross. Things started to go downhill after the release of Superman 3 in 1983. Fans of the first two installments were ultimately left unsatisfied with the end result. Solid box office, but the movie was met with harsh reviews. Things took an even sharper downturn with Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which significantly underperformed compared to the previous Superman films, earning only $30 million worldwide. In contrast, Superman and Superman 2 each surpassed $100 million. This was without a doubt the worst received Superman movie, given Christopher Reeve's own comments on his regret with the film. This would ultimately kill the franchise and hurt Superman's momentum.
You let the whole team down. Lame ass nigga.
Batman on the comic front would go on to face monumental levels of success and resurgence in the 1980s. The Dark Knight Returns was a 4-issue miniseries written by Frank Miller that sought to combat the stigma of Batman being too kid-friendly, pushing back against years of stories that downplayed his ruthlessness and ability to instill fear in criminals. The release of The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year 1 and The Killing Joke helped pave the new way Batman was being seen by the comic community. Year 1 helped redefine Batman's origin in a post with Crisis on Infinite Earths DC continuity. Tim Burton's Batman movie really cemented the dark and gritty version of the character back into the public eye, grossing around $400 million in the worldwide box office, and winning an Academy Award for Best Art Direction. The movie would surpass Superman by breaking a multitude of box office records, which include being the fastest movie to earn $100 million, and it was the highest grossing superhero movie up until Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Regardless of the reception of future installments like Batman Returns, Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin, Batman was undoubtedly the dominant superhero in theatrical movies from 1989 to 1997, just before the surge of Marvel properties like the X-Men and Spider-Man films. He might be one of the only superheroes out there who can have flops and still come out on top. Batman and Robin definitely tarnished the reputation of Batman for a handful of years, becoming the lowest grossing Batman movie out of the ones released since 1989. If this were any other DC character, they would have been sent straight to the gulag for at least a decade. Look at what happened with Green Lantern. He had one bad movie and WB decided to never use the character in any meaningful way and even canceled the Green Lantern animated series. Batman would go on to make another grand slam with the hit success of Batman the Animated Series, often regarded as one of, if not the greatest superhero cartoon of all time, which initially took inspiration from the Tim Burton Batman movies with its darker aesthetic. This was mainly put into place by the head of Warner Brothers Animation wanting to capitalize off some popular IPs at the time, to which Batman 89 was one of those massive successes WB had their eyes on. Not only did BTAS get nominated and win several daytime Emmy Awards, it was also a launching point for an interconnected series of shows that spanned across several years and focused on a multitude of DC characters from Superman and the rest of the Justice League to lesser known heroes like Static. The DCAU is viewed as the best adapted universe of DC in pretty much any medium outside the source material, and is the definitive iteration for a lot of heavy hitters, including Batman. Around the same time of Batman's resurgence in film, leading to the very early 2000s, the Batman books started to expand in a grand way by introducing characters like Tim Drake and Cassandra Cain into the mix. DC created numerous solo Batman-related titles featuring characters like Tim Drake as Robin, Cassandra Cain as Batgirl, Catwoman, Nightwing, and Azrael. Additionally, in response to growing public interest, DC expanded its Batman-centric lineup with titles such as Batman Legends of the Dark Knight and Shadow of the Bat. If you thought the 90s were a major decade for Batman's rise in the mainstream, it only escalated from there. Batman and Robin left a bad taste in people's mouth, shaping a negative perception of Batman on the big screen, but thankfully Christopher Nolan clutched up with Batman Begins that once again reintroduced audiences to a grittier, darker Batman. The movie ended up being the second highest grossing Batman movie up until that point, second to the 1989 Tim Burton movie. It sort of popularized the obsession in Hollywood wanting to have more grounded, grittier takes on superheroes. You'd see this trend in a lot of major franchise reboots, even outside of superheroes in the 2010s. Batman Begins also popularized the way people perceive Bruce Wayne's journey to becoming Batman, cementing it as one of the definitive origin stories. Batman Begins somehow gaslit an entire generation of people into thinking Bruce Wayne trained with the League of Assassins, or I guess the League of Shadows in this case, and Ra's al Ghul prior to becoming Batman, when he traditionally doesn't encounter either until a few years into his career as Batman. The year after Batman Begins released, Warner Brothers finally brought Superman back to the big screen nearly 20 years after the release of Superman 4. There have been attempts to make a Superman movie in that time frame, but obviously they never panned out. Superman Returns is this weird sequel to the Christopher Reeve movies because it takes place 5 years after Superman 2 and completely ignores Superman 3 and 4. It also takes place around the same time as the year of the movie's release, despite the original films having been released in the late 70s to early 80s. Its total box office amounted to around $390 million worldwide, but Warner Brothers had felt the movie underperformed, canceling any future plans for a sequel. I think WB not going forward with any plans for Superman movies until Man of Steel really hurt the public reception for Superman amongst the generation born around that time frame. Because you have, say, the Dark Knight and Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy that were foundational to an entire generation's admiration for both titular heroes. The only Superman movie to release pre-Man of Steel in the 2000s was the one where they were trying to continue a timeline from 26 years ago instead of going forward with a fresh new take on the character. On the opposite end, Christopher Nolan came out with yet another banger, The Dark Knight, which solidified the trilogy as one of the top choices on people's lists of greatest superhero movies. I mean, what aspect of The Dark Knight wasn't successful? It's the first ever superhero movie to gross over $1 billion in the worldwide box office. It had the biggest opening weekend and single day box office of all time, beating out Spider-Man 3. The movie won not one, but 2 Oscars, one for Best Supporting Actor thanks to Heath Ledger's legendary performance as the Joker, and another for Best Sound Editing. Remains as the highest rated comic book movie on IMDb and is placed in the top 10 on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know if this was the exact moment or if it was the years following the success of The Dark Knight, but this was for sure the time frame where WB execs went, oh, so Batman's our moneymaker. Say less. I mean, he already proved to be a profitable character, but this was unprecedented levels of success for any comic book superhero. 2008 to 2015 was a prime era for Batman across different mediums of entertainment. Only a year after the success of The Dark Knight did Rocksteady deliver the first installment of the Batman Arkham series, which would go on to revolutionize Batman in gaming. Sure, he's had other games in the past, but none hit quite as well as Arkham Asylum, immersing the player in Batman's extensive rogues gallery in innovative ways with a captivating story, toppled with bringing back the animated series voice cast. Future Arkham games would prove to be smash hits in the games industry and for Warner Brothers games as a whole. Batman Arkham City was the best-selling superhero video game of all time until Insomniac's Spider-Man on the PS4. The 2000s really emphasized the versatility of Batman's character with each passing new entry. There was almost something for every kind of Batman fan. You want a Batman with a bit more levity and action-packed Silver Age elements in a modern setting? Go catch an episode of Batman the Brave and the Bold that was airing on Cartoon Network. Want something that implements his vast roster of fantastical villains while still maintaining a dark and gritty aesthetic? Batman the Animated Series and the Arkham games might be your cup of tea. Want something more kid-friendly? Play the Lego Batman games or watch the Lego Batman movie. Looking for another very action-packed Batman? The Batman 2004 show is a slept-on banger. I think writers' willingness to tackle Batman more often than other superheroes is a byproduct of the Batman franchise having to adapt and redefine itself in order to stay relevant. The evolving interpretations and tones of his stories and characters allow writers to craft the character in ways that remain true to his roots while also keeping him fresh and engaging for new generations. I mean, just look at the amount of animated movies that have come out centered on Batman alone. He's had around 33 animated movies, not including Lego. Batman's surge in popularity never seemed to die down after the Dark Knight trilogy. The near simultaneous success of Batman in almost every medium, having high comic sales, making an impact in superhero gaming, breaking box office records with The Dark Knight, it all came together like a giant puzzle on what WB decided to capitalize on the most with the DC brand. Even in times of peril where there were mishaps in previous entries like the Joel Schumacher movies or the DCEU's complete and utter collapse, Batman still managed to get a solo movie released that put him in the good graces of audiences again. Meanwhile, characters like Superman seemed to get the short end of the stick in theatrical adaptations. He didn't get a movie after Superman Returns until 2013's Man of Steel. Soon it's going to be 12 years since that movie's release, which will mark yet another reboot attempt at trying to get audiences attached to Superman again. Though it seems like they may be heading in the right direction. DC as an IP is so much more than Batman, and any true fan of the franchise can see that. Writers and artists didn't spend decades upon decades fleshing out the interconnected lore and continuity of the vast cosmos of DC Comics just so their favorites can get ignored and shunned by WB in favor of more Batman. If things go according to plan with the future of DC Studios, there's a chance people will see DC for what it actually is, something that isn't just the Batman cinematic universe.